All right, fantastic. So, hi, I'm Tiffany. I am part of the 52 Hike Challenge team. I manage all of our leadership team, which are our leaders that run our statewide chapters. So, Sherry is actually one of our leaders from Iowa. Hi, Sherry. Um, and so we have leaders all around the country that lead hikes and help manage some Facebook groups. So, but I am going to turn today over to Jesse and Elena, who have a lot of important stuff to talk to us about. So, go ahead, guys.
Great, thanks so much. We'll go ahead and share our screen and we can make sure the recording is started as well.
All right. Thanks for joining us. My name is Elena,
And I'm Jesse.
and we are here with Leave No Trace as a traveling team. And so our job is to travel around the country and talk to people about how we can get outdoors in a way that both enjoys those spaces and protects them for future visitors. And we are really here because we love the outdoors and we believe that everyone ought to be able to have the opportunity to get outside. And there's really no substitute for nature. There's so many wonderful benefits of getting outside. And it's this really valuable resource that we have. And we know that as more and more people get into some of our shared parks and public spaces, there can be impacts that accrue because of that increased use. And so these impacts come when people are often uninformed or misinformed of the kind of consequences their actions have. And so at Leave No Trace, we believe that we can leverage education as a tool to disconnect this seeming relationship between increased use and increased impacts that follow. And as people are more and more equipped with as good of information as possible as to how they can minimize their impacts, then we can all kind of work together to share these outdoor places.
Yeah, absolutely. And leave no trace can really mean many different things to different people. It's pack it in, pack it out, leave it better than you found it. I like to think about leave no trace as a framework or a toolkit for helping me make good decisions or minimal impact decisions in the outdoors. I like to make sure that I'm not thinking about it as a set of rules that is there to impose upon me or that I'm there to impose upon others, and to kind of enforce how people are specifically supposed to behave. It's there to be an educational tool that can help us. But beyond being, this philosophy, this toolkit, this framework, Leave No Trace is also one of the world's leading research organizations. And so we kind of address these risks of outdoor recreation by teaching people about the outdoors. And so our research tells us that when people receive this kind of training, they're actually up to 5 times more likely to take proper actions to protect nature. So all of our recommendations and research really is science backed. And so we're here to kind of gather the data and make sure that we're giving people recommendations that actually do work.
Yeah, I know I learned Leave No Trace as kind of an idea, a philosophy. But as an organization, we make it our job to to teach people, and we want to share this information as far and wide as possible. And so our kind of three pillars of work fall under expanding training for all people, increasing stewardship, so inviting more and more people to kind of join this mission of taking care of these outdoor spaces, and then advancing the science and research, like Jesse said. So we want to come and bring the world as current of research as possible so that we know that we're doing the best things when we're outside.
Yeah, and when it comes down to it, leave no trace is not about being perfect all the times. I know we want to do the best we can, but leave no trace really is a spectrum. So on one end of our spectrum, we have significant impacts. We have this beautiful lake that's very polluted, and on our other end of the spectrum, we have fewer impacts. We have this pristine meadow. But even on our fewer impact side of our spectrum here, you can see that there is a trail going through, right? And so humans are always going to have some sort of impact. And the impact that a mountain biker might have is just going to be fundamentally different than a horseback rider or a hiker or a fisherman, right? And so it's not necessarily about trying to be perfect because ultimately nobody is really perfect. Um, our goal here at Leave No Trace is to kind of cast a wide net and reach as many people as possible and help push them to make small continual improvements towards that fewer impact side of the spectrum. So as long as we're improving every single day and continuing to learn about how we can get better and move towards that, that's going to be ultimately the most effective way that we can pursue, having that large scale positive impact on leaving no trace on our world.
Now, we have kind of a toolkit to minimize our impacts. Um, so the 7 principles of leave no trace are a way to kind of frame how we can minimize our impacts in all of the different categories that we might have on the environment. So we can impact the wildlife, the water, we can impact other people, as well as the soils, and of course, other vegetation. And so the 7 principles give us tangible ways that we can consider how to act outside. And we'll dive into each of these and then give an opportunity for questions and discussion at the end. And I also will mention some of these will have kind of interactive activity, and we'll ask for some of your input in the chat if you don't mind joining us. So we'll start with principle number 1, plan ahead and prepare.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first principle of leave no trace, like Elena said, is to plan ahead and prepare. And this is arguably one of the most important principles. It's kind of the grandfather of all the principles because it's really the one thing that we do before we're in the outdoors. And so this is really what's going to set us up for success in all of the further principles, because we need to know about the space that we're going to, about ourselves, about the gear that we need to bring. And if we don't know that, we're not going to be in a great position to, make sure we're not accidentally feeding wildlife or starting a fire or packing out our trash, right? So this is really where, it all begins. So there's a lot of things we want to know about an area and prepare before we go into the outdoors. So when we're researching a destination, we want to know the terrain, the weather conditions, the different type of activities that might be allowed or permitted in the area. And really, that's where we want to start looking at specific regulations or guidelines that the park might have. But it's also about, the things that are changing. What about the weather? Is it going to be cold? Is it going to be rainy? That's going to really change how I'm able to protect, the environment and myself. And so that really brings us to, making sure that we have the right gear for our trip. And we actually think about gear in terms of, there are really 10 essential items that we always recommend bringing on any sort of overnight or even like a longer extended day trip. And this is really going to set you up in that good position. Um, and we'll kind of go into what those 10 pieces of gear are. But, a good way to think about this is one of the most impactful things that you can do on the outdoors is actually have to be rescued. So obviously that's a dangerous situation for yourself, for the rescue, workers who are out there. But when someone's life is on the line, sticking to trails is kind of secondary in saving someone's life. So it could be a very impactful event and also, of course, very dangerous. So we want to make sure that we are setting ourselves up for success. So we'll do a little kind of activity to see if we can figure out what those 10 most essential items are.
So this activity is called the 10 Essentials game. And so I'm going to pull up on the screen a bunch of icons representing items that you might pack in a backpack if this is more oriented towards overnight trips. And so if you all could write one or two items that you see out there that you think belong in that 10 essentials.
Yeah, I think, you're packing for your trip. You can only fit 10 items into your backpack. What are those 10 items going to be? What do you think is going to be the most important things here? And I know some of this imagery is a bit representative of kind of a general category of item that you might want to bring. If you have any questions about what things are, you can also put that in the chat. I think we have a hairbrush or a tennis racket right in the middle. That one's maybe a little bit hard.
Headlamp and water we have from Sherry.
Yeah, yeah. So a light source, some sort of water source. Absolutely.
Those are important. There's a couple others.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Take a few more moments to think about it and we'll show the answers. All right. So hopefully you picked out about 10 things. I see a couple more answers still coming into the chat. Looks like we got a lot of them in the chat here. So the 10 essentials are running through them: food, water, shelter, extra layers or clothing, first aid, navigation. So that could be a map, that could be a compass, that can be your phone if you do have service or an offline map, a light source, so a headlamp, a flashlight, sun protection. So that can be sunscreen, like what's pictured here, but that could also be, a sun shirt, something that's not going to have chemicals can be even better. A multi-tool that can really vary based on, the type of trip you're doing. That can be a pickaxe, that can be a Swiss Army knife, like what's pictured here. Something for emergencies or something for cutting. And then finally a fire source, and that can be a lighter, that can be matches. And so, some of these things are there for, covering our essential survival, like food, water, shelter. But then other things here are more geared for those kind of emergency situations. So, fire source, first aid kit, something that will help us get out of potentially more dangerous situations.
Now, when you're going on a day hike, you might not need all of these items, but this list is a really good place to start when thinking about what you might find useful given how long you're hiking, for example, and if something or some situation that was unforeseen were to arise, it's better to be extra prepared. And you can also consolidate some of these items too, depending on your trip. Your navigation and your light source could be your phone if you have a good battery source and are confident in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of these things, the shelter, that doesn't have to be a full 12-person tent, right? Especially if I'm just going on a day hike and aren't even intending on camping. It can be an emergency tarp or something that's there that even if I'm not intending to use it, say I roll my ankle or for whatever reason I'm not able to get out as I intended to, having that option is going to be a great, tool for me.
Moving on to principle number 2, travel and camp on durable surfaces. This principle really considers the impact that our footsteps and our campsites or tents have on the ground. So what we are actually walking over. And it's important to walk and ride on our designated trails. So we want to stick to trails because they're designed to withstand a lot of impact. They've already been compacted, and so we're not disrupting vegetation or preventing organisms from growing again. And of course, when we are finding campsites, we also want to find campsites that have been camped on before and are designed to have that sort of impact, because just the weight of us in our tents can prevent vegetation from growing back as easily. And so we say good campsites are found, not made. But what makes an actual durable surface? We're actually going to turn that question over to you and play another game activity in the chat called Durable or Not Durable.
Yeah, and so how this is going to work is we're just going to show an image of a surface, and it's a simple question: is this something that is durable or is this something that is not durable? And we'll discuss exactly what that means afterwards. So we'll put up an image and just type in the chat whether you think this is a durable surface or a not durable surface.
Starting with rock. Is that durable or not durable?
Yeah, and we'll check in chat. Give you a moment. I'm seeing some knots come in.
One durable.
Yeah, so a rock is definitely a durable surface. So this is something that's going to be hard. It is not going to be damaged necessarily by me walking on it. So this is a great durable surface.
What about wildflowers? Are those durable or not durable? There we have a vote for not. The wildflowers are indeed not durable. So we have two kind of easy ones to start out with, but wildflowers will certainly be impacted by us stepping on them, and it disrupts the life cycle of that plant. What about pine duff? This is the dead down pine needles that fall off of the trees. Is that durable or not durable? I see a durable. Pine duff is a durable
Yeah, great
surface.
job. So even though this is vegetation that is dead, and it's actually going to be quite cushioning as well. So the soils below it are going to be less compacted by us. So this is a great durable surface, especially if you're camping, it's nice and comfortable.
What about wet grass?
This is another tricky one, I would say. We're starting to get into a little more complex questions here. So I'm seeing some knots come in, not durable, but I'm also seeing some durables. Yeah, so we're a little bit split on this one. And actually, wet grass is going to be generally considered to be a not durable surface. And why is that? Well, when vegetation gets wet, it is much easier for it to be pulled up by the roots. If you've ever walked, in a wet field, especially at like a festival or anything, you'll see kind of muddy trails forming really quickly. And that's because that ground is softer. It's much easier to tear up this vegetation. So if we have the option, we want to avoid trampling on, wet grass or wet vegetation in general. Dry grass, on the other hand, is going to be a durable surface. So this kind of circles back to the idea of planning ahead and preparing. If we're, aware of this weather, we're going to put ourselves in a better position to potentially, not have this impact by avoiding times when it's going to be wet.
Our final question for you is mud. Is mud durable or not durable?
This is another really tricky one. So, mud. It is another, kind of wet soil. It's kind of soft. I'm seeing
Wait,
some knots, some knot durables come in. And this is surprising, but in fact, mud is considered to be a durable surface. And so even though it seems soft, like of course you're going to leave a footprint perhaps in it, mud is going to be more durable than the alternative, which is going off the trail or stepping on the wet vegetation to the side of the trail. And which really hits home the idea that durable surfaces is also falling on the spectrum. And really, we want to pick the most durable option. So if our option here is to, go through a mud puddle or to step off the trail and potentially widen that trail, going through that mud puddle is actually going to be the more durable option. Now, the most durable option is not going through it at all. So if we are able to plan ahead and prepare and avoid wet times, that's the best case scenario. But if we are in this situation where we're already on the trail, we want to encourage going through those mud puddles. So those are great job on that, everyone. And those are some good examples to try this out. But it's good to also have a good understanding of what durable means in general. And so there are really two key characteristics that define what a durable surface is. So it's either one of these things or the other. So a durable surface is either resistant. So that means it's hard. I can jump up and down on it. Nothing's going to happen. So that's, the trail, rock, gravel, a boardwalk, a sidewalk, anything like that that's just really not going to be moved by me walking on it. And alternatively, a surface could be resilient to be durable. And a resilient surface is something that can kind of bounce back fairly quickly. So an example of that is a drier grass. If I put my foot down, yes, it's going to move, but when I remove my foot, it's going to spring back up, as opposed to something like a wildflower, or if you're in the Southwest, something like cryptobiotic soil that will not recover or not bounce back as quick. So we want to make sure that we're looking for surfaces that are either going to be resistant to us walking on them or resilient at the very least.
Our principle number 3 is dispose of waste properly. And this is a big principle. It kind of covers 3 big categories of waste. That is our material waste, such as our trash, our human waste, such as our pee and poop when we're outside, and third is our gray water. So what kind of dirty water might we be creating if we're washing dishes or washing ourselves? Um, Now we'll talk about trash in a moment, but and we'll move on to our human waste. Now, if we're in the outdoors and we have to pee or poop, that's a very normal thing to have to do, and it's always going to be the least impactful if we are able to find a bathroom or something designed to have our waste in it. That could be a privy or an outhouse if we're kind of deeper in the woods. But that might not always be the case. And so the other 2 ways that we can manage our poop specifically is by packing it out in a designated pack out bag or a WAG bag. WAG stands for Waste Alleviation and Gelling Bag, and it's a bag that's double layered so that it contains our human waste in a safe way, and it has a gelling powder that deodorizes and kills all the bad bacteria in our poop so that we can throw it away in a trash can once we come across one. Now, the other way that we can manage our human waste is by burying it, and that's in a cat hole or a hole in the ground in kind of rich organic soil that's about 6 to 8 inches deep and 200 feet or 70 big steps away from water. Because our ultimate goal when pooping outside is to protect our water sources, the health of animals and other humans, and to maximize decomposition if we're burying our waste. And so that 6 to 8 inches beneath the surface of the ground is what maximizes decomposition. Now, another type of waste that we might have or encounter on the trail is our pets' waste, and we want to be sure to pack out our pets' waste. They're not eating a diet that is similar to the natural animals in that environment, and so their poop is also very harmful to our water sources and the health of wildlife and other humans. And so instead of leaving our bags on the trail to pick up on the way out, one thing that we can do is actually tie the bags to our pets and have them carry out their own waste, just because we don't want to indicate to other people that it's okay to leave their pets' poop bags on the trail, of course. Now, we also want to be mindful of our gray water. And so if we're doing dishes outside, we want to avoid putting soap, even if it's biodegradable, into our water sources. And so washing dishes or ourselves, again, 200 feet or 70 big steps away from water sources is important to let that biodegradable soap actually biodegrade in the soil. Now, going back to our trash, of course, everything that we bring into the outdoors, we want to pack back out with us, even if it's crumbs, even if it's food items. And that's because most of the things that we make don't break down or don't go away nearly as quickly as we might think. So we have another activity for you all, a little trash timeline game in which we'll show a couple items, common litter items, and ask how long they take to break down if they were left as litter, starting with the orange and banana peel. So if you can write in the chat, how long in days, months, or years do you think it takes for an orange or banana peel to break down?
I'm seeing one guess for 2 years.
2 years, 1 year. The orange and banana peel does in fact take about 2 years
Yeah,
on
great
average
guess.
across the US. That's exactly right. And this can be surprising to folks because it is biodegradable. It's a plant material, but because it's so fibrous, it can tend to dry up and just sit there. And it's actually one of the most common litter items that we see when visiting national parks because a lot of people just don't know how long it will be there. And unless you're leaving an orange underneath an orange tree, it's not native to that environment, and we want to be sure to pack it out, especially so it's not impacting wildlife. What about aluminum cans? How long might they take to break down?
This might be a little bit longer than the fur, I would guess.
One vote for 10 years.
10 years.
It's a metal, so it is going to be much durable. The aluminum can is going to last 80 to 100 years. So this is about a century, and longer than the average human lifespan. So the metal will eventually corrode, but aluminum is actually one of the most easily recyclable materials, or most easily recycled materials. And it's cheaper to make an aluminum can from recycled aluminum than it is from aluminum ore. So we really want to keep this metal in our recycling system and make sure not to leave it outside. Our last item is a plastic bottle. How long does it take for a plastic bottle to break down?
This is a good question as well. These are my least favorite. Let's see. Any guesses in the chat? How long do we think that would take? 500 years? All right, so we're thinking a little bit longer than, and seeing a guess for never as well. Let's see.
So plastic bottles do, in fact, pretty much never break down. They will last indefinitely when left outside, and that's because plastic is one of the most durable types of material that we make, and it might weather, so break into smaller pieces, but those pieces are still chemically plastic, and they get increasingly harmful as they get smaller, because they're so lightweight that they can wash into our water systems. And wildlife might accidentally think that it's food and eat it. And then it gets into our food systems. So we want to make sure not to leave plastic items outside, and get them to the proper disposal.
And if we do have them, reusing them multiple times, or even better, picking a reusable alternative like an aluminum water bottle, that's going to help us avoid them, altogether.
Yeah, we want to lessen the demand for plastic.
Absolutely.
Moving on to principle number 4.
Which is to leave what you find. And so, we go out and explore the outdoors for a variety of reasons. A lot of that has to do with, seeing the beauty of nature and seeing what nature has to hold, and kind of experiencing that kind of untouched, pristine wilderness, feeling that, potential of, going into this place that feels like no human has been there in, very, very long, at least. And so by taking things out of these spaces, or by carving or by leaving some sort of marking behind, we're not only taking away from that experience for other people, but we're also having, potential impacts on the environment. So, for picking wildflowers, that flower is not going to be able to seed potentially, or if we are carving our name into a tree, that's going to, break that protective barrier and make them more susceptible to disease. And really, a lot of times people struggle with this because it feels like, well, it's just one thing. It's just one thing that I'm taking, or a small mark that I'm leaving. And the reality is there are just so many people going into the outdoors these days that it's unfortunately it's not just one time. These impacts really become a problem when they start to accumulate and build up together. And so when everyone is taking just one small flower, that's when we're going to strip the entire field away. And so, items that we find, it's not just natural items, it's also those cultural items. So artifacts, or pictoglyphs or petroglyphs that we might find. These are also important, resources for different cultures or archaeology. And it's important to not only just leave those where we find them, but also potentially not even tell others about them. So oftentimes it is in many cases illegal to geotag archaeological sites. And we've come across many instances of people finding maybe arrowheads or pottery, and not intending to take them home for their souvenir, but bringing them to a ranger, and thinking that is going to be something that's helpful to them. And in fact, from an archaeological standpoint, it's very important that we are leaving these exactly where we find them, so they're able to document those. So oftentimes rangers will have to go and put them back where they found them. And from a cultural standpoint, it's really important that we're not, disturbing these things or sometimes even entering these spaces at all, so that we can preserve this important cultural resource for those of which who have come from these cultures, and kind of make sure that they're able to preserve their heritage in that way.
Yeah, and one other note about leaving what you find is that we can forage sustainably outside. And it's important to understand the role that what we are foraging for plays in the environment, so that we're not taking too much and we're allowing foraging to continue into the future. And it's also important to be aware of what the land management regulations are in the area, because they do vary based on who is kind of operating that
Yeah,
space.
absolutely. Some places you can take rocks, some places you can't. It's really important to just do these things in an informed manner. And that again circles back to that principle 1, plan ahead and prepare.
Very nice. On to principle number 5, minimize campfire impacts. And minimizing campfire impacts is really important, because campfires have, on one hand, this really powerful kind of way of bringing people together, and they can be culturally significant. And on the other hand, if a campfire were to get out of hand, they can be very destructive. And so we want to be aware and considerate of how we are having our campfire, and if we even need a campfire in the first place. So there are 4 primary considerations that are important to think about when thinking about fires. And the first is it allowed in the space that I am in? So knowing what the regulations are in the area that we're going to, is the most important thing to know, and especially a good thing to research in our plan ahead and prepare phase, because the land managers are going to know if there are particularly high winds, or there's a lot of dry fuel load on the ground that make the risk of a fire spreading really high. And so in those cases, they'll put bans on fires, and we want to be aware as visitors when those are occurring. Now, our second consideration is, do I need a campfire? So there are many different uses of fire. They can include light, warmth, cooking source, or even just entertainment. But for all of those categories, or for all of those uses, there are alternatives that we can use instead of building a fire. And that could include a headlamp or lantern for light. We can bring extra clothes or layers for warmth instead of using a fire. We can use a stove for cooking, which are far less dangerous or risky for spreading that flame. And we can bring cards or tell stories as a way to entertain ourselves when we're outside. Now, if we do decide to have a fire, we want to make sure that we are aware of where it is going. And it's always going to be less impactful to have a fire in a place that has already seen fire before. So we always want to make our fire in a place such as a designated fire ring, because the heat of the fire can actually sterilize the ground below it and prevent vegetation from going back. And so we don't want to make new fire rings. They can be lasting scars on the ground. And so we want to kind of consolidate that use as much as possible. Now, what are we going to burn in our fire? What is our fuel is our last consideration. And so good firewood is found or bought from local vendors, often at the campsite that you're going to. There's kind of a mnemonic device for describing good firewood in the backcountry, and we call that the 4 Ds. That is dead, down, dinky, and dispersed. Now, we want to find firewood that is dead or not living. It's very dry. We want to find firewood that is down, so not still on standing even if they're dead trees, standing trees can provide habitat for other
Even falling
animals,
trees can.
or fallen trees with their branches still attached. We're looking for firewood that is already broken off the tree in as close to the right size as possible. And that brings us to our third D, dinky. Dinky is describing small firewood. In the backcountry, we like to say about the diameter of your pinky. And in the front country, about the diameter of your wrist is dinky firewood. And we're looking for dinky firewood because that ensures that we can burn it all the way through. And burning it through all the way to ash makes it a little bit easier for us to extinguish it at the end. And then we're not leaving charred logs afterwards, which can be an eyesore or just impactful to the next visitors coming to that space. And then finally, our fourth D is dispersed. And now this is a little bit nuanced because when we're in the backcountry, we don't want to be collecting firewood from a really isolated kind of camping spot because that can deplete the nutrients entirely from that area. And so a good way to pick up firewood is by collecting it along the trail as you walk and then bringing that bundle over to where you have it campsite. Now, in the front country, we don't want to be bringing wood from as dispersed of an area as to import it over state lines because bringing firewood from home even can bring tree killing insects or pathogens and diseases into a new area. And so we want to buy local firewood if we're in the front country.
All right, so let's move on then to the sixth principle, which is to respect wildlife. So there are two kind of main ways in which we are respecting wildlife, but in general, it's important to recognize that whenever we go into the outdoors, when we are in, we are a visitor, whereas animals, this is their natural habitat. And so we want to be, good house guests. And the best way we can do that is, first of all, by using proper food storage. So making sure that we are not purposefully or most likely inadvertently feeding wildlife. Now, wildlife is going to be attracted to anything that has a scent. So things can become food for wildlife that we might not think of as food. So that's, things like deodorant or trash. So we want to make sure that we are locking up and making inaccessible anything that might have a smell for wildlife. And even if this is food, most likely it's going to be a non-native food like we talked about. So that's not going to be healthy for that wildlife. And if they are getting into these things, it's going to actually cause a phenomenon called habituation, which is essentially, once an animal gets access to food, it will change and alter their behavior. And this can get to the point where they're potentially aggressive, or it's increasing the likelihood of negative human-wildlife interaction. So we've had, instances of completely wild bears, get into food and become habituated to the point where they're dangerous and actually do have to be put down within the span of 2 or 3 weeks. So this is a process that can happen really, really quickly. So we want to make sure that we are using proper food storage, and that can look like a variety of different things depending on where we are. If we're in the front country, oftentimes we have, those bear lockers or established infrastructure that we can use to store our food. Sometimes that's in our car. But oftentimes we don't have access to that, and that's when we would want to use either a bear hang, so hanging our food up off a tree, or even better, and what we generally recommend is using what's called a bear can. And a bear can is essentially an oversized medicine jar that has a child-proof or a wildlife-proof lock on it. Makes it difficult for them to open. They can still smell this food, but they won't actually be able to get into this can. And what we do is we put anything that has a smell. So again, that's our food, that's our trash, that's our deodorant, into that bear can. And then to make sure that we're not drawing those animals into our own campsite, we want to put that again at least 200 feet or 70 big steps away from where we are camping. And that's going to really make sure that they're not able to get into that. Now, the other way that we respect wildlife is just by giving them enough space to live their lives uninterrupted. And there's an easy rule of thumb or a thumb trick that you can use to just gauge if you are a safe distance away from an animal. And so we can try that out. We have what's called our thumb trick here. And how this works is you would stick up a thumbs up, very straight out, make sure your arm's straight, and you'd close one eye, and you should be able to cover up these animals completely behind your thumb. And if you see them, poking out from behind your thumb at all, that is an indication that you are potentially too close to the point that you are either a danger to that animal or that animal is a danger to you, and you should move further back. And so this is a great trick because it scales to the size of the animal. So of course we have to be much further back from a bison or a moose than we would for a bird or a squirrel. And this also applies to groups of animals. So if we have a mother and her young, we want to be able to cover up the entire group. So it's just a really quick and easy way to double check that we are giving them enough space.
Our final principle, number 7, is be considerate of others. And this really rounds out the 7 principles with this idea that everyone is out to recreate in different ways. And so the more we are considerate of our expectations going out there, and the more we can be friendly to everyone that we encounter, the more likely it is that other people are going to have good experiences and likely to want to protect those places going forth. And this could look like keeping our pet under control because not everyone is comfortable around pets. It could look like being a little bit quiet when we're outside and looking to hear the sounds of nature, maybe even seek wildlife. And we also want to just remember that everyone is recreating differently. And so we are we're really out there to have a good time and to help other people enjoy these spaces as possible or as much as possible. And this could be like acknowledging other people on the trail, smiling and talking about how you can use the same trail in multiple different ways. It could look like yielding to other users if you're on a mixed use trail. So in general, if you are sharing a trail with hikers, bikers, and horseback riders, those horseback riders have the right of way just so that we keep the riders and the horses safe. So we want to give them enough space to pass. The bikers, on the other hand, yield to everyone else just because they have that mechanical advantage. They can speed up and slow down a lot faster than the other users. Now, we have a little bonus principle, and that's social media. When we're outside, social media is more and more the way that people are learning about these spaces. So we want to be aware of the impact that geotagging has on our public spaces. If we address or if we add a geotag to a location that maybe isn't able or equipped to facilitate large amounts of people, there's a lot of impacts that can follow from these people coming to one particular location. So we want to use discretion when geotagging. Now, we also want to use social media to educate people. This is a great democratic way to share information. And so the more we can incorporate leave no trace principles into our media, the better, because people are really using this as a resource.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's all about the time we do have today. We want to thank you guys for being with us. For those of us watching the recording, we hope you are able to apply these principles and share them going forward. If you're interested in volunteering, we are a small organization, so the power really comes from our people, our members, our advocates, our volunteers. So we do have this QR code, or you can copy that one below to get involved with us even further. We'd also like to just quickly thank our partners. They allow us to provide this free education and do this great work. And we'll leave you off with, if you do have any questions for us, we'd be happy to answer them. So please put them in the chat. But if you don't have them right now or want to ask later, we can also give you our email. which is right here on the screen. So you can jot that down as well. If you ever have any questions, we're here to be a resource for you. So please don't hesitate to ask. We can answer it or get you in contact with someone who might be able to help you out as well. But otherwise, thank you all so much for your time, and we hope you learned something new.
Thank you both. That was super, super informative. Um, so happy that you joined us tonight. I hope everybody learned something. Anybody have any questions? Looks like no.
You're
Make
very thorough.
sure to check out the Leave No Trace things that they shared with you, and this will be recorded so you can go back and get anything you missed. Thanks so much, guys.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.